here. When I got into this, I felt like I was on the beach, and I walked, and I stepped in, and I dropped off the continental shelf. It was like deep, and I was just like drowning. This is really deep subject. So Chris, if I could have you read, I'm going to pass out some reading here. Romans 13, verse 1 and 2. Steve, Daniel 2-21. Ellen, Proverbs 6:20-23. Jackie, are you capable? Yeah. You, Ephesians 4-11-13. I'm sorry, there's a whole lot of reference verses here, and you can do Colossians 3:23, and I'll read the verse after that. That'll get us, and then I'll pass out some more verses here. Has everybody got them?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, Chris?
Everyone must submit to governing authorities, for all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by God. So anyone who rebels against authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and they will be punished.
Does anybody have mind here? The New International Version: whoever rebels against authority is rebelling against God, and they will bring judgment on themselves. And the Old King James, written by King James, says the Old King James says, subject to damnation. Sounds like something a king would write or want written.
Mine says, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves.
So, can you all give some examples from history where people didn't pay attention to this?
Probably continuously.
Yeah, probably continuously. I've got some here. Well, let me give you some. I got some here. Good King John, my ancestor. That's being facetious. Magna Carta, a document written where the nobles took away the authority of the king and gave themselves written rights in 1200 something.
50.
Okay, thank you, dear. The English Civil War, where King Charles versus Cromwell and the parliamentarians, and the king was actually beheaded. So for a while, England did not have a king. The American Revolution.
Right, that's what I was thinking about.
The French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and this is recent, the Civil Rights Movement. So in dealing with this, and there's article after article after article. I was reading an article. The first is, God said it, so just don't complain. So Steve, can you read Daniel 2:21?
It is he who changes the times and the epochs. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to men of understanding.
So what does that mean?
God knows what he's doing.
God's in control.
Yeah.
God sets up governments and God removes them.
That's part of Daniel's praise to God after he gets this vision about what's going to happen. So he's recognizing that God is the one that's going to bring these things to conclusion.
So there were other articles here. There were so many. Governments are different now than then. Really?
Yeah.
Really? How? I mean, they had Nero. They were under Nero back then. Not a great guy. So there's been bad governments since the beginning of time, and people have been oppressed. So you want to say governments are different now? Not really. And then this is the justification for. I'm going to give you the justification for how we live today. We're trying to deal with this
With the
verse,
tension that's there, huh?
the tension that's there, and this gave me tension as I was going through it, because I was going, how do I live? How do I live? How do I think? And how the first two verses kind of just took me back. So I'm going to go through something here. There's authority. Authority starts with God in 4 different ways, and then I'm going to discuss something that's called Christian resistance theology, which that just sounds like a deep subject for this class, but let's. So Ellen, one of the first spheres of authority is family, and then, of course, the commandment says that we are to honor our father and mother. So, can you read Proverbs 6:20 to 23?
I just had it marked. Now I lost it. 6:20 and 22.
Chapter 6, 20 to 23.
My son, obey your father's commands and don't neglect your mother's teaching. Keep their words always in your heart. Tie them around your neck. Wherever you walk, their counsel can lead you. When you sleep, they will protect you. When you wake up in the morning, they will advise you. For these commands and this teaching are a lamp to light the way ahead of you. The correction of discipline is the way to life.
So who is the head of the family? God is the head of the family. Not give some hierarchy as the husband and wife, but God is the head of the family. So within that family structure, there's areas in our life that God has addressed authority as to how to raise our children, how to live our lives, how to live with our spouse, etc. The next frame of authority, these 4 groups, is church. The church's authority in our lives are within that structure. Jackie, could you read Ephesians 4:11 to 13?
And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, for building up of the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God.
So the church has a purpose. The church has authority in teaching, in nurturing, in passing out spiritual discipline. But the church can't tell you that to buy your kid an Xbox. So if the church stays out of your family, your family is one. Yeah, they overlap, but the church has things that are, that your family authority is separate. Work. Okay, can you read Colossians? Work is the next thing, and all of us are retired now. But work was a sphere of influence. So can you read Colossians 3:23?
Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for men.
Okay, and I'm going to read 1 Peter 2:18 to 21. And some of the versions say servants, some say slaves. Slaves, in reverent fear of God, submit yourself to your masters, not only those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. For it is commendable if someone bears up under the pain of unjust suffering because they are conscious of God. But how is it to your credit to receive a beating for doing wrong and endure it? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, it is commendable before God. To this you are called, because Christ suffered you, leaving as you an example as how you should follow in his steps. That's a very harsh verse in our today and age. So what was slavery like? What was slavery in Roman times? How many of the people were slaves?
Well, like almost all of them.
Yeah, there was no.
If you worked somewhere, you were a slave, basically.
Yeah, there was very few people who made a living as a baker or a shoemaker, or most people just were slaves. So anyway, that is and unfortunately this verse, along with the first 2, were used in American culture and history to, the slaves were trying to be evangelized. They were also preached this over and over again You know, you're in your state. God has you in this state. You need to be compliant. That's just history. And now the final spear that this whole chapter about is government, and when Christian resistance theology. And I was reading a whole bunch of what I'm going to call theology nerds who were, you know, they would write 20 paragraphs with one scripture reference back and forth to each other, and I couldn't read anything. But basically it goes back to Luther and the Reformation, where government and religion became intertwined. The Papal Church, the Holy Roman Empire, and all these things, just the church just became totally entwined with the government, so there really wasn't a separation of, what am I going to say, authority. So this is an interesting, something I learned here. It was a speech, it's not a speech, it was a sermon given by a guy by the name of Jonathan Mayhew in 1750. And he did it up in New England. And he said, rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. Now, this is 26 years before the American Revolution. Why did he do that particular sermon? Jackie's already got this history tidbit this morning. So the Episcopal Church, kind of like the Catholic Church, they send out what at that time, what you were going to have a lesson on. So all the way from the church in England to the colonies, and this particular weekend, they were to preach a sermon venerating, and that means really making a to-do about what a great guy was, King Charles I, who got beheaded as a result of the English Civil War.
Hate it when that happens.
He got beheaded, and they were to preach on Romans 13. Now, this pastor was a Congregationalist, which was kind of a descendant, their church is descended from the Puritans, and he got wind that this was being done, and he preached differently. So that's some of the separation that was going on in the colonies between people who went to one church and who went to the other, as to how the American Revolution broke down.
A rebuttal, huh?
John Adams called it his sermon was the Catechism of the Revolution. So John Adams says, paraphrasing John Adams believed that God had birthed America for the purpose of getting the gospel to the world. Their work that day in Philadelphia would create a new government, would begin to secure that purpose. He summed up the feelings about America when he wrote, I always consider the settlement of America with reverence and wonder as the opening of a grand day of providence for the illumination of the ignorant and the emancipation of the slave part of mankind all over the earth. So, Chris, can you read verse 3 and 4?
For the authorities do not strike fear in people who are doing right, but those who are doing wrong. Would you like to live without fear of the authorities? Sure. Do what is right, and they will honor you. The authorities are God's servants, sent for your good. But if you are doing wrong, of course you should be afraid, for they have power to punish you. They are God's servants, sent for the very purpose of punishing those who do what is wrong.
So, what does this mean?
If you do right, no problem. If you do wrong, you better watch out, which is not always true. But
If you don't want trouble with the traffic officer, don't speed.
yes,
We used to call it at work staying under the radar. Don't bring attention to yourself. Keep your head down, work, do what you need to do. Don't be a rabble rouser. So anyway, these people, they're not just at the head of the government, but the authorities, the army, the military, all these people, they can make your life miserable if you're causing trouble. So don't do that. Steve, can you Apologize about this. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 13 and 14.
1 Peter 2, 13 and 14.
This goes really along with this, is used as the other.
Okay. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether to a king as the one in authority, or to governors as sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. Just the two verses.
13 to 16. I'm sorry.
16. Okay,
Sorry
let
about
me
that.
keep going. Where did I look? Okay, there we go. For such is the will of God, that by doing right you may silence the ignorance of foolish men. Act as free men, and do not use your freedom as a covering for evil, but use it as bondslaves for God. The next verse says, honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king.
In verse 17, show proper respect to everyone, love the family of believers, fear God, honor the emperor. So, we always talk about, I hear people say, he's not my president. Oh yeah, he is. yeah, this guy is, and that guy was, but yeah, he's your president. He's all. So here's a question. It gets into when we're not getting along with the government. Does Roman, and this First Peter that we just read here is always used as a parallel when chapter 13 is being taught about. This was used to tell people you need to be in line with the government. It's been used in conjunction for sermons for centuries. So here's a question: does Romans 13 prohibit all civil disobedience? Are you allowed not to go along with the government? Or when should you not go along with the government?
I don't think you should always go along with the government, and I don't know that this says that, but
So
I'm saying it.
Yeah.
Well,
but it says submit yourself to. It doesn't say whether they're good or bad.
Right. I'm thinking of Hitler.
yeah, well, so let me. There's a guy by.
A lot of people, yeah, Russia today.
Think of North Korea.
Yeah,
So anyway, there's a famous pastor by the name of John Piper, and they asked him a question about this, and I want to. He says this in words, and I was like, I could paraphrase, and I could have written all this down and read it to you, but I'm going to play what he says about this. It's not that long, but it really opened up. I'll turn this louder.
Pastor John, do the rather strong words in Romans 13, verses 1 through 7, indicate that civil disobedience is always wrong for the Christian?
I don't think Romans 13, the first paragraph there, rules out all civil disobedience. Let me read just a piece of it because it sounds like it does, and I admit it's a significant exegetical problem. So it says, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God. So be subject because authorities are from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. So there's the basic statement. We ought to be submissive to government because government is of God and it's a gift of God. Sometimes people who get their back up real quick and want to plead for civil disobedience before they think too much forget that anarchy and mob rule are horrible, horrible things. I remember watching the movie Gandhi, and those couple of scenes where the mobs got out of hand and turned on a man, and the terror that came over me just watching the power of a totally lawless mob. You are utterly helpless. And so government in keeping a cap on the evil of the world and restraining evil and bringing some kind of order is a great gift in a world of fallenness. So I just want to say yes to God's gift of government in a world of sin. But we all know World War II, Nazism, Pol Pot, all kinds of illustrations from history that government can go wrong, which makes verse 3 and 4 look really strange. And I think this is a clue to what Paul is up to. Rulers are not a terror to good, but to bad. And we read that and we say, Paul, how can you possibly say that? You're being thrown in jail every other week, and Jesus was crucified by governments. What do you mean they're not a terror to good conduct, but to bad? And then he goes on and says, you'll receive their approval if you do what is good. In verse 4, they are God's servant for good, and they are an avenger to carry out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. And that's the argument for why we should be submissive. And we say, well, if the argument is so weak, how does the conclusion follow? I think Paul, if he heard us say that, he would say, listen, here's what I'm doing. Number one, Caesar is going to read this, and I want to make sure that the ruling authorities in Rome know that Christians are not anarchists. We are basically law-abiding citizens, and we believe that he has his position by God. That's the first thing. And the second thing, I think he wants Christians to say, don't get your back up so easily, because being wronged by a government sends nobody to hell, but being rebellious and angry and bitter and spiteful does send people to hell. And so it's a much greater evil for you to be rebellious than for the government to mistreat you. A much greater evil for you, that is. Now, if you step back from Romans 13 and say, are there any appropriate acts of civil disobedience? There are. I mean, Acts 5:29, I think it is, where it says we must obey God rather than men. The apostles must preach because the authorities have told them they shouldn't. And then we have the example of the midwives in Exodus, where they wouldn't kill the baby boys. And we have Daniel, who right after they make the law that you can't pray, he goes up and kneels down in front of a window and gets thrown into a lion's den. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego won't bow down to the big golden statue. And Esther is told by Mordecai, you've got to go to the king because we're all going to be killed if you don't go to the king. And she writes back and says, you can't go to the king. It's against the law if you go to the king unbidden. And he writes back and says, we're going to die anyway. And she says, okay, if I perish, I perish. And she breaks the law. He mercifully raises the golden scepter, and she's spared. But she was willing to risk breaking the law for the sake of her people. And so I think the principle is this: citizens to governments, children to parents, wives to husbands, church members to elders, all of those are called to have an appropriate submissive spirit and to follow leadership. None of those is considered to be absolute. All of them have the lordship of Jesus riding over the lordship of the superior, and thus defining the limits of the lordship of the superior.
Thank you, Pastor John, and thank you for listening to this podcast. Email your questions to us at askpastorjohn@desiringgod.org. You can find thousands of other free resources online from John Piper at desiringgod.org. I'm your host, Tony Reinke. Thanks for listening.
Okay, so I hope you all think that was put in words that I certainly couldn't have. So we've have we read the verse 6 and 7 about taxes yet?
Nope.
Okay, who is next to read?
Ellen, I think it's your turn.
Can you read chapter verse 6 and 7 and chapter 13?
6 and 7, okay. Pay your taxes too for these same reasons. For government workers need to be paid so they can keep on doing the work God intended them to do. Give to everyone what you owe them. Pay your taxes and import duties, and give respect and honor to all to whom it is due.
So what does that mean?
Pay up.
Yeah.
Nobody likes taxes.
It's coming soon.
Yeah.
Nobody likes to pay taxes, but we all have to pay them.
And in
My-
those days, the tax collectors were often crooked.
Yeah.
And so this says, doesn't matter, pay them anyway. You owe it, pay it.
Jackie, could you read? Oh, so anyway, the King James version and my version says those you pay taxes for the authorities. So the Greek words there is ministers, and this is the same as in Hebrews 1:14. Jackie, could you read Hebrews 1:14?
Yes, just a second.
Sorry about that.
14.
Yeah.
Are they not all ministering spirits sent out to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit salvation?
So anyway, it's putting the same Greek word is used there. These authorities are set up by God, just like these angels. They have their purpose. So God has given authority and government to the people downstream of the leadership, and we're to pay our taxes and obey them. So I remember it was 1983, and I remember that because that's when I met Jackie and got married. But anyway, in Bakersfield, there was a guy, and he had said, we don't need to pay income taxes. It's not in the Constitution. It's unconstitutional. And I was working out on this construction site, and then he had taken it. I'm going to take it to the Supreme Court. We took it up to a certain level, and he said, no, you need to pay your federal income taxes, and you're going to pay them, and you're going to jail. And so there were these groups of people on a Friday afternoon gathered on the job site who hadn't been paying their taxes, waiting for the axe to fall. So anyway, that's just my, pay your taxes, pay homage to the government, pay people upstream and downstream of the leader. So it's 10 till. Do we want to continue? Sure. Sure. Okay. Can you read verse 8?
Let's see, where are we going down? Verse 8, yeah. Let no debt remain outstanding, except the continuing debt to love one another. For he who loves his fellow man has fulfilled the law.
So what does this mean?
Love one another.
Don't owe money to others.
Yeah.
Give your lawnmower back that you loaned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
anyway,
what's really important is the relationship that you have with the people that you borrowed it from.
I wrote in my own. I said, if you pay your debts on time, you are viewed as a better, more trustworthy person. So in in that Roman society and the culture they were in, it's okay to loan. Christians are a good bet to loan money to. They always pay their debts back. It's just these are the entire purpose of what's being written here is for people to promote Christianity and Roman culture to an extent. Chris, can you read verse 9 and 10?
For the commandments say, you must not commit adultery, you must not murder, you must not steal, you must not covet. These and other such commandments are summed up in this one commandment: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to others, so love fulfills the requirements of God's law.
So, basically this is, parroting what Jesus said. The greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. So be a good citizen. Don't murder, don't steal, don't commit adultery, and love your neighbor. This is Christianity 101 in 2 verses. Steve, can you read verse 11?
Yeah. Do this, knowing the time, that it is already the hour for you to awaken from sleep. For now salvation is nearer to us than when we believed.
So what does this mean?
Well, that statement is certainly as true today as it was then.
Yeah.
It was in the first century.
Yeah.
And, we're 2,000 years further down the road.
Yes.
So whenever Christ's return is, we're closer to
We're
it
closer to it.
than when
Than they were.
the message
Yeah, it's not
first
like
started.
Christ is imminent. We are closer
Yes.
because we're getting older,
And, it's time to get up and do what you're supposed to do. Follow these things.
Well, didn't they think that Christ was coming back like any old minute?
Yeah. I mean,
So-
they did. But I mean, I think this was going over their, was going over their head. It's like, no, you are getting closer to Christ coming. Not necessarily the coming of Christ is an immediate event.
When we studied Revelation, one of the things that stuck with me from that was that we should be praying for Christ's kingdom to come, for Christ to carry out what the whole plan is here, and it involves praying for the leaders of the government, that things would come out through them, or praying that God would deal with the situations that are out there right now. Should we be praying that Putin's government falls because it's so corrupt from the interior? I mean, that's kind of the thing that he was saying in there, was that you look at where you are and you pray for God to use what is happening now to bring
Further
about
his kingdom.
Yeah, bring about the ultimate plan.
So Ellen, if you can read verse 12 to 14, which finishes up the chapter.
Okay. The night is almost gone. The day of salvation will soon be here. So don't live in darkness. Get rid of your evil deeds. Shed them like dirty clothes. Clothe yourselves with the armor of right living as those who live in the light. We should be decent and true in everything we do, so that everyone can approve of our behavior. Don't participate in wild parties and getting drunk, or in adultery and immoral living, or in fighting and jealousy. But let the Lord Jesus Christ take control of you, and don't think of ways to indulge your evil desires.
So live good publicly and privately. I should. Any comments on that?
Like the last verse, it says, and don't let yourself think about ways to indulge your evil desires, which is like, you're lying awake at night thinking about ways to.
Well, people that lie awake on night figuring out how they can,
Yeah.
scam people out of money, how
Right.
people can, just whatever they can get away with.
People that would rather rob and steal rather than work. Lots of that going on.
Well, if that's it, folks, I hope you
Okay.
all enjoyed
Good,
it.
Joyce.
Thank you, Joey.
Thank you.
Good job.